I think there are some things that can warm you up. Why, the Christmas spirit can warm you up. Or a good Christmas story, you know, when you're gathered around by the fireside and a storyteller and so forth. So come on, gather around here. Let's see if we can have a Christmas story. Now, well, I'll tell you, it's going to be about an Irishman. And because it is Irish and because I'm just a little Indiana boy, I really can't be held responsible for my Irish accent, but I'm going to try to tell it in the Irish accent. And this is a story about an old feller named Teague. That's kind of a funny name, but you know, you got some funny names in Ireland. Well, Teague took it into his head one year that there was nothing quite so good as having gold, don't you know? So he gathered up all the gold he could possibly get. And as a matter of fact, there were sometimes he wouldn't even eat so he could turn his money into gold. And sometimes he wouldn't even buy good clothing so he could turn that clothing money into gold. He took all the gold, put it into a sock, don't you know, and popped it into a hole under the boards of his floor of his little cottage there in Ireland. Well, Christmas Eve came along. And normally, Teague at Christmas Eve time would step outside his door and stand on his doorsill and he'd yell across the little lane to a fella named Barney over on the other side. Barney, a one-legged feller, you know. And he'd say, "Hey, Barney, come over for a bit of the sop, will you, Barney?" Hey, but this Christmas, you know, old Teague got so hungry for more gold, he said, "Well, Barney, you'll just have to go hungry this Christmas time." And he went back in, he bolted his door, and he sat there in the dark. Not even building up the fire, mind you, because that would take some of his gold. And then pretty soon somebody knocks on the door and says in a quivery little voice, "Teague, Teague, are you in there? There are two of us out here, Teague, and we've got no fire to get warm by. Can we come in, Teague?" But Teague, you know, just locks up his mouth and doesn't say a word because he doesn't want to be friendly on Christmas Eve. And then pretty soon the little girl Cassie comes and knocks on the door. "Teague, Teague, aren't you going to invite Barney over for Christmas Eve dinner?" But oh, Teague just sits there, doesn't say a word. Teague is almost asleep by this time. And you know what happens? The door is barred, but even though the door is barred, in pops a little fairy, just about so high, wearing a green coat and a green cap and a jolly little face on him. And then in comes another fairy and another and another. And pretty soon there must have been 100 fairies there. And the chief fairy says, "Well, old Teague, hey, I see you still got a little bit of a fire there. We needed a place to stay warm, so we thought we'd take over your cottage for the evening." Teague doesn't know what to think. He just sits there on a stool looking at these fairies at his big kitchen table, having a jolly good time. And then he sees the king of the fairies say a little bit of magic. He says, "Clippity-clap, clippity-clap, what I want is me wee red cap." And then all of a sudden, out of the air pops a wee red cap. And the king of the fairies pulls it on over his head and just feels so good. And then the king of the fairies says, "Clippity-clap, clippity-clap, I want to go to Spain." And all of a sudden, he just pops right up the chimney and off he goes to Spain. And the other little fairies do the same thing. Clippity-clap, 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 clippity-clap. And all these red hats popping down. And up the chimney they go over to Spain. Well, now here is old Teague, mean, miserly old man at Christmas time he was. He said, "Say, that's a good idea. That's a nice way to save money when you're traveling. And that's a nice way to save money if you want a new piece of clothing." And so he tried it. He said, "Clippity-clap, clippity-clap, what I want is me new red cap." And surely enough, there's a new red cap, and old Teague is so delighted, puts it on over his head, and he holds his finger up to his nose and says, "Clippity-clap, clippity-clap, I want to go to Spain." And he shoots up the chimney top, the English Channel, and there's Spain, right in the company of all those fairy people, the good people of the world. And then the king of the fairies says, Clippity-clap, clippity-clap. All I ought to do is go to the Great Hall of the King of England. And so they all say that, and they all go back across the English Channel, and there they are in the Great Hall of the King of England, and there's the king yourself seated up in a great big throne chair, you know. And there's a big, beautiful fire with all the lords and ladies sitting around, and they're eating figgy pudding and plum pudding and having just a marvelous time until the king of the fairies says, "He's a wicked, stingy old man, he is." And they pointed to Teague. Teague didn't know what to think. He didn't know he was... And the little fairy starts saying, "Off with his head, off, throw him in the dungeon, take away his red cap." And all these things they were ready. And the King of England says, "Is this true?" Teague says, "Please, sire, I never did anybody any harm. I swear, sire." The king said, "You may not have done anybody any harm, but have you done anybody any good?" And you know, old Teague thought and thought and thought, but he couldn't think of anything good he'd done for anybody. So they all said, "Off with his head." And then somebody said, "Let's grab him." And they did. And they were ready to take him down to the dungeon to wait for his beheading. But then Teague said, with a bright idea, oh, sire, one last request from a dying man." The king said, "And what might that be?" "I lost me wee red cap. Could you fetch it for me, sire?" Well, kings, you know, can do almost anything. With a snap of the finger, one of the little fairies got the red hat. Teague put it on his head, and very quickly he said, "Clippity-clap, clippity-clap, I want to go home." And before he knew it, there was Teague, right in his fireside. You know what Teague did? He tore up the board in his floor. He built up the fire in his fireplace. He unbarred the door. He opened it. He stood on his door sill, and he yelled out to Barney, "Hey, Barney, would you come over for a bit of supper with me?" And pretty soon old Barney came. And you know what Teague did? Teague turned to Cassie and said, "Here's a handful of gold. Take it down to Mrs. McDowell's, will you, and bring me lots of food stuff and some nice warm mufflers for presents, 'cause it's Christmas time, Cassie, and we ought to be sharing, you know." Well, that's the way old Teague got warm. Now, there's a little bit of sharing here going on, too. Now, a little surprise for you. You gotta wait. You gotta wait. If you go over the Christmas tree, you'll find one little present with your name on it. So let's see what we have over at the tree, huh? Yeah? There we go.
On this, the first of 2 Christmas programs. We hope you'll be with us again next week at this same time. From the students, faculty, and staff at Ball State University, may we wish you and yours a very Merry Christmas.